I've saved my progress as pointtextheadline.ai, found inside the O8 type folder. And just so that you know where we're going here, I'm going to switch back to finalformattedlimerick.ai, also found inside the O8 type folder. And notice that I have my guidelines visible. You can make yours visible as well by pressing Control semicolon or Command semicolon on the Mac. And if I click on this text at the top of the page here, poem written, project placed, notice that the headline is set in the font Trajan Pro Bold, and I'll show you how that works shortly. I've also set the byline in Adobe Castle on italic, but what's more to the point is the headline is completely filling the width of my margin guide. It's even exceeding it slightly with that comma. Also notice that we've got a point at the beginning of the text. So this is point text. We've got a baseline for each line of text, and we have no text frame. Therefore, there will be no automatic text wrapping associated with this text. And that's the way it works with point text inside of Illustrator. And that's actually a good thing when you're working with specialty types. So imagine you're working with headlines or bylines or callouts or logos. You don't want Illustrator constantly wrapping your text for you inside of some imaginary and useless text frame. The only time you need text frame is when you need that kind of regimental control. You need text inside of columns. That is when you're working with body copy or tables or that kind of thing. So point text is the perfect way to go in the case of this type. I'll switch back to my document in progress. I'll click on that type in order to select it. Now, it's not absolutely necessary at this point in the game, but it's best to get in the habit of selecting your type by clicking on the baseline, that is, the imaginary horizontal line upon which your characters of type rest. And notice that we currently have 2 lines of type set up right now. I'm going to press Shift-Tab to bring back my right side panels. And then I want you to bring up the character panel. Now you can bring up this panel fairly arduously by going to the window menu, choosing type, and choosing character. And by the way, it's called character because there's 2 varieties of text formatting inside of most applications out there. There's character level formatting, which affects the individually selected characters of type. And then there's paragraph level formatting, which affects entire paragraphs at a time. So we're going to start with character. Now you can choose this command even though it's awfully hard to get to, or you can just remember the keyboard shortcut Control-T or Command-T because this is your main type panel inside of Illustrator. And that brings up this character panel right there. Now you can go ahead and expand this panel if you like by clicking the double arrow icon, and that will expand the panel to include a bunch of additional formatting options. But for now, let's go ahead and leave it semi-collapsed. So we're just seeing the most essential options inside the panel. These include the font option right there, currently set to Myriad Pro. We've got the style option, and notice in Illustrator, we're not seeing a bunch of style icons. In other words, we're not seeing a bold icon or an italic icon, because most fonts don't work that way. We think of your everyday average font as including a regular style, an italic, and bold italic, but that doesn't apply to most fonts that you're going to run into. In fact, some fonts include far fewer styles than that. Other fonts, such as Myriad Pro right here, include many more styles. On this machine, I have 4 different condensed styles, as well as the usual regular italic, bold, and bold italic, but I also have semi-bold and semi-bold italic, which is somewhere in between. So Illustrator, quite wisely in my opinion, arduously sticks to those designer-defined styles. All right, next in the list is type size, which is how big the text is, of course. We've also got leading, which is the amount of vertical space between the rows of type. You might hear it called line spacing as well. Most design applications refer to it as leading, and that's leading, not leading, which draws its name from the world of hot metal type, back when they actually used strips of lead in order to separate lines of type. Next, we've got kerning, which is the amount of room between 2 neighboring characters of type, and that can vary automatically, by the way, as we'll see. And then we've got this thing called tracking, which is your way of spreading multiple characters apart or bringing them together. All right, so having given you a sense of how these options work, I'm going to switch my type size to something very, very large. And I could select a predefined option from this list. For example, I could go with, let's say, 60 point. But I don't want you thinking that these predefined numbers are any better than any value that you would enter. Any type size is going to render just fine from Illustrator. These guys are remnants of the old days when we needed screen fonts, but that's not the case anymore. So I could select 60 point if I wanted to, but I just happen to know I want to work with 58 point text in this case. And then I'm going to tab over to the leading value. And notice by default, it's set to 120% of the size value, and that's what's known as auto-leading. And when you see the leading value inside of parentheses, you know you're working with auto-leading. You can switch to auto-leading at any time you like by selecting auto from the pop-up menu. However, I'm going to go ahead and enter a manual value, and I'm going to change this value right there. I'll click on the leading icon to select the entire value, and I'm going to change that value to 62 points like so. And we'll leave the other options the way they are, but I want you to see what we've come up with here. Notice that my type is extremely wide. It's so wide that it exceeds the boundaries of the first artboard and flows into the second artboard, which would mean, of course, it'd get cut off because Illustrator isn't going to print this area between the two artboards. That's, of course, not at all what we want, but I just want you to see point type does not wrap automatically inside of Illustrator. That's going to sometimes seem like a bad thing. If it is a bad thing, you should be working with area type instead. That is text inside of a frame. But generally, again, where specialty type is concerned, it's a really good thing because it puts you in control of exactly how your lines break. And in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my type tool, which I can get by pressing the T key. I'm going to click right there in front of the P in project. I'm going to press the backspace key in order to get rid of that extra space right there, which I'm not going to need as soon as I press the enter key or the return key on the Mac in order to enter a manual carriage return, also known as a paragraph break. Then once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and accept my modifications. Now, you can accept your modifications in one of two ways from the keyboard, if you like. One is to press Control-Enter or Command-Return on the Mac, which I think makes sense. However, there's also a keyboard shortcut that I don't think makes any sense whatsoever, but it's a little easier. You press the Escape key. That goes ahead and escapes out of the text editing mode. That makes sense, but it also goes ahead and saves your changes, which is the part I don't think makes any sense at all, because normally when you press Escape, you cancel your changes. But anyway, once again, it's Control-Enter or Command-Return on the Mac, and the other option is to press the Escape key. In the next exercise, I'm going to show you a few really great tips and tricks for changing your typeface.